gate agent glanced from the passport to the calm, older black man before her and made a decision that would detonate her career. She had no idea the man she was about to publicly brand a fraud was a senior investigator for TSA Internal Affairs. And she had no clue his only purpose today was to see if the whispers about her were true. The air at Atlanta's Gate T8 was thick with the smell of stale coffee and travelers' anxiety. Under the harsh fluorescent lights, the agent, a woman with a severe haircut and a name tag that read B. Walsh, took the passport. Great, she thought. Another one. Her eyes flicked from the photo to the man's face, then back, her lips tightening into a thin line. "You sure this is yours?" she asked, her voice flat and loud enough for others to hear. Samuel Sterling met her gaze, his expression unreadable. "It is. 4 complaints in 60 days, he thought, his hands resting on the handle of his carry-on. All from black men, all describing the same treatment. At this gate, with this woman. To the outside world, he was just a man in his late 50s, dressed in a simple travel jacket, trying to get to Seattle. His power was in that invisibility. "Doesn't look right," Brenda Walsh declared, sliding the passport on the counter away from her as if it were dirty. Her painted fingernails drummed an impatient beat. "What's your business in Seattle?" "Consulting," Samuel replied, his voice steady. "Consulting?" She repeated the word slowly, dripping with disbelief. "What kind of consulting?" "Security." It was the truth, just not the version she could comprehend. Her eyes narrowed, scanning him from head to toe. She wasn't listening. She was judging. "Is this how it starts?" he wondered. "With a look that has already decided you don't belong here?" "I'm going to need to verify this," she announced, her tone leaving no room for debate. She pointed a finger. "Step to the side, over there." Samuel complied without a word, moving to lean against a nearby pillar. He didn't check his phone. He didn't let out a heavy sigh. He just watched. Patience wasn't just a virtue in his line of work. It was the entire job. He saw her shake her head as she typed furiously into her terminal. Then she shot a look at the next passenger, a young white man in a university hoodie, and shared a quick conspiratorial smirk. A look that said, "Can you believe the nerve of some people?" That's when Samuel knew for sure. A cold certainty settled deep in his gut. This was no longer just about gathering data for a report. This was the test. And Brenda Walsh had no idea she was the one being graded. She waved the young man forward, her entire demeanor changing in a flash. A wide, practiced smile materialized. "Mr. Finch, have a wonderful flight to Seattle. We'll be starting the boarding process shortly." "Appreciate it," he said, grabbing his documents. The whole interaction took 4 seconds. Samuel took a slow, deliberate breath as the line moved. A family with restless children, a businessman barking into his phone, a young couple lost in each other's eyes. Each was processed with a smile, a quick scan, and a pleasant send-off. The line flowed for everyone but him. After 5 minutes that stretched into an eternity, Samuel stepped back to the counter. "Excuse me," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "I was hoping for an update on my document verification." Brenda didn't bother to look up. "It's still pending," she snapped. Then, with a theatrical sigh designed to be overheard, she finally raised her eyes. The customer service mask was gone, replaced by undisguised contempt. "Sir," she began, leaning forward as if speaking to a child, "I'm going to ask you again. Are you absolutely certain this is your passport?" "I am," Samuel said, holding her gaze. "Because this picture," she said, tapping the photo with a sharp red nail, "looks nothing like you. And frankly, this whole thing feels off." A woman sitting in the front row audibly gasped. She looked from Samuel's dignified, weathered face to the official photo in the agent's hand and frowned. The resemblance was undeniable. "It's a valid passport. It was issued 13 months ago," Samuel stated, his composure a steel wall. "City of birth?" she demanded, her voice sharp. "Philadelphia," she squinted at him. "And your middle name?" Samuel paused for a half second. "Augustus." A triumphant smirk curled her lips as she typed. She had him. She was sure of it. "This is a forgery," she declared loudly, for the whole gate to hear. And before he could say another word, she gripped the passport in both hands and tore it clean in half. The sound sliced through the terminal's low hum. A man nearby muttered, "Oh, she did not just do that." The two halves of Samuel's passport, his identity, a federal document, lay on the counter like a piece of trash. Brenda Walsh crossed her arms, a look of grim triumph on her face. "You will wait for airport security," she announced to the silent, watching crowd. "You may be detained for attempting to travel with a forged document." Samuel stared at her, then at the torn pieces of his life on the counter. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. No one was pretending not to watch anymore. Phones were out, their small red recording lights blinking in the harsh glare of the terminal. Finally, Samuel spoke, his voice dangerously quiet. "I'm going to need you to repeat what you just said." She smirked. "You heard me." Just then, a young airline crew member hurried over. "Brenda, is there a problem here?" "I've got a forgery situation," she said, puffed up with her own authority. "I've already neutralized the document." The young man's eyes widened in horror. "You tore up his passport?" "It was fake," she insisted, turning back to Samuel. "Sir, do you have any other form of ID?" Slowly, deliberately, Samuel reached down and opened his black leather carry-on. He didn't fumble or rush. He reached inside and pulled out a slim, government-issue wallet. He didn't hand it to her. He simply flipped it open, revealing the gleaming gold seal and the bold, unmistakable letters of his federal credentials. He held it up just long enough for the young crew member's face to drain of all color. "Sir, are you with TSA?" the young man stammered. Samuel's voice was like ice. "Internal Affairs." He snapped the wallet shut and returned it to his bag. Brenda Walsh's face froze, the smug satisfaction instantly dissolving into a wave of sickening dread. "And I will require the names of every single gate agent and supervisor on duty," Samuel continued, his voice resonating through the now silent boarding area. Immediately, the smirk was gone. The power was gone. All that remained was the dawning, horrific realization of what she had just done. "You have just destroyed the passport of a federal investigator during a live audit," Samuel said, letting each word land with the force of a hammer blow. "You have made a public accusation of a felony, and you have denied boarding without cause. I suggest you call your supervisor. Now." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. He just stood there, a picture of absolute control, as Brenda's world crumbled. Her face, once a mask of smug authority, was now chalk white. Her folded arms were no longer a sign of defiance. They were a desperate attempt to hold herself together. The young crew member was already on his radio, speaking in fast, hushed tones. The whispers in the crowd grew into a low murmur. "I knew it," a man holding a tablet said to his wife. "She was sweet as pie to everyone else." Then he walks up and she just flips a switch. Total profiling. Brenda looked desperately around, her eyes landing on Samuel. Her voice was a strained whisper. "Look, I'm sure this is a misunderstanding we can work out." Samuel's gaze was like granite. "You made it something more than a misunderstanding the moment you put your hands on my property." She flinched as if struck. Just then, an airport security officer, his name tag reading Miller, arrived, looking from Brenda to Samuel. "What's the situation here?" Samuel turned his head slowly. "She destroyed a federal document. Mine. Without cause." Officer Miller blinked. "You want to file a report, sir?" A woman in the front row laughed, a short, sharp sound. "Oh, he's filing more than a report. Check social media." Another passenger held up his phone. "It's already going viral. Tag the airline and everything." Brenda spun towards the officer, her voice rising with panic. He was non-compliant. He refused to verify his identity. "That is a lie," Samuel stated calmly. "I provided a valid U.S. passport. I answered every one of her questions. I stepped aside when instructed. The airline's own video footage will prove it." He tilted his head toward a security camera mounted on the ceiling. "And that camera, right there, will prove it too." Officer Miller's hand went instinctively to his shoulder mic. "Dispatch, I need you to preserve surveillance at Gate T8. We have a potential federal incident." The sharp click-clack of heels on the tile floor announced a new arrival. A woman in a crisp navy blue blazer approached, her badge identifying her as Diane Holloway, Zone Supervisor. "Ms. Walsh," she said, her voice firm and cutting. "My office, now." Brenda hesitated, then followed like a sleepwalker, her face ashen. The supervisor turned to Samuel. Sir, on behalf of the airline, I am so sorry. May I have a word with you in private? Of course, Samuel nodded. As they walked toward a sterile service corridor, the sea of phones remained up, tracking their every move. The verdict was already in. The court of public opinion doesn't wait for official reports. The hallway was cold. The air inside the small, beige-walled interview room was even colder. It was a room designed for tense conversations, with a metal table bolted to the floor and a vent humming overhead. Diane Holloway closed the door, her expression all business. She was no longer a supervisor. She was a crisis manager. "I'm Diane Holloway," she began. "I need to get everything on the record, Mr. Sterling, Samuel Sterling." He reached into his carry-on, retrieved the slim government wallet with his credentials, and slid it across the table. She picked it up. Her eyes scanned the gold seal, the official photo, the ID number. She went rigid. You're conducting an inspection?" "I was," Samuel said plainly, "until your employee escalated it into a federal crime." Diane Holloway let out a slow, controlled breath. The clipboard on her lap suddenly seemed useless. "I see," she said, her voice tight. "I need to inform my terminal director and the airport police." "I would assume so," Samuel said. "You'll also want to pull the unedited surveillance footage from Gate T8, from every single angle." The airline's regional office was a pressure cooker. Diane Holloway stood with two others who had been pulled into the firestorm. Mark Caldwell, a bulldog of a regional manager, and Eleanor Croft, the airline's top lawyer, whose face was a mask of polished ice. "We are fully committed to investigating this incident," Eleanor began, her voice smooth and rehearsed. "And we will cooperate with all relevant federal agencies." Samuel sat across from them, his federal ID still on the table, a silent testament to the gravity of the situation. "I'm sure you are," he said. "But let's be clear, this wasn't a misunderstanding. Your employee publicly destroyed a federal document after accusing a citizen of a felony." Mark Caldwell leaned forward, trying to sound reasonable. "We understand emotions were running high. Mine were not," Samuel cut him off, his voice quiet but absolute. The room fell silent. That one sentence dismantled their entire damage control script. Eleanor Croft changed tactics. "Mr. Sterling, what are your intentions here? Are you planning to pursue legal action?" "I'm not here to discuss a lawsuit," he said, his gaze sweeping across their anxious faces. "I'm here to complete my audit." He reached into his carry-on and pulled out a thin folder, placing it on the table with a soft thud that echoed in the silent room. He opened it. "This is my preliminary report for TSA Internal Affairs. It also contains a pattern of formal complaints filed against your airline over the last 8 months. 5 of them originated at Gate T8. 4 of them," he paused, letting his eyes rest on each executive, "named Ms. Brenda Walsh specifically." He slid one of the complaint summaries across the table. "And all 4 of those complaints were filed by black men. They all described the exact same pattern of behavior: baseless suspicion, a condescending attitude, and being treated like a criminal from the moment they presented their ID." He looked directly into Eleanor Croft's eyes. "Does any of that sound familiar to you?" The air went out of the room. This was no longer just about a destroyed passport. Samuel had just laid the evidence of systemic, racially motivated misconduct on the table, and his own experience was the irrefutable proof. Diane Holloway visibly paled. Mark Caldwell looked like he'd been punched in the gut. Just then, a junior staffer rushed in, holding a tablet. "It's on the national news," she whispered, her voice trembling. "The passenger video? It has over 2 million views and it's climbing." Eleanor's composure finally cracked. "If we arrange a meeting with our diversity and inclusion team, would you be willing to participate?" Samuel looked at her, a hint of pity in his eyes. "My job is to report the facts. It's not to help you write a better press release." He stood, collected his folder, and slid it back into his bag. He looked at the executives, now scrambling in the wreckage of their own making. "You have a very small window to make this right," he said, "and it's closing fast." The final reckoning came not in a courtroom, but in the same sterile interview room. Brenda Walsh sat at the table, this time across from Diane Holloway and a stone-faced Mark Caldwell. "We have reviewed the security footage, Brenda," Diane began, her voice cold. "We have reviewed the passenger videos. We have reviewed Mr. Sterling's report. It was a fake ID, Brenda insisted, her voice shrill. It was not, Mark Caldwell cut in, his voice a low growl. He is a senior federal investigator, and you destroyed his passport on camera. The U.S. Attorney's Office has already been in contact. He slid a single piece of paper across the table. It was a resignation form. You have two options, Diane said, her voice leaving no room for negotiation. Option 1, you sign this resignation, effective immediately. We will state only that you are no longer an employee. You walk out of here and disappear. She leaned forward. Option 2, you refuse. We terminate you for cause, and we hand over our entire internal file on you, including the past complaints from Dallas, Fort Worth, and the 4 previous profiling complaints from this airport, to the Department of Justice. You will face federal charges for destruction of government property and likely a civil rights investigation. You will lose everything. Brenda stared at the paper, her hands trembling. The arrogance, the smug certainty, it had all evaporated, leaving behind a terrified, cornered woman. She looked from Diane's icy stare to Mark's barely contained fury. There was no escape. She snatched the pen and signed her name, her signature a jagged scrawl. Your ID badge and all other airline property. Now, Diane commanded, holding out her hand. Wordlessly, Brenda unclipped the badge from her uniform, the plastic card that had given her so much power. She placed it in Diane's palm. It was over. Her escort out was not through the public terminal, but down a series of gray service corridors, a walk of shame. As she was led toward the employee parking garage, carrying a small cardboard box with her personal items, she saw him, the young crew member who had tried to intervene. He was walking with Officer Miller, the airport cop from the gate. They stopped. They didn't gloat. They just watched. The young man looked at her, then at the box in her hands and gave a slow, deliberate nod. It wasn't a nod of pity or triumph. It was a nod of finality. The system had worked.